Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. So today we got another Warhammer 40k video for you guys, another reaction video. We've checked out other versions of this video from several other content creators, but today we're going to check out Arbiter Ian's version of every Warhammer 40k faction, and he's going to do it apparently in 20 minutes. I'm going to have the link to this video without any of my commentary, his original video, and to Arbitor Ian's channel down below in the description. Should absolutely go check out his stuff. He's a great content creator. He's got a lot of Warhammer 40,000 stuff. Check out his Patreon. So if you guys want to give him some extra support, some extra love, that's where to go, and all the stuff to check out. So go on and do that. Give him a sub. Let him know that I sent you. But for now today, like I said, we're going to check out every Warhammer faction, every Warhammer 40k faction, excuse me, in 20 minutes. So let's see what other kind of interesting tidbits of information we can get from him. I always like, you know, seeing similar videos from multiple perspectives, just to see what other kind of information we get from various content creators. So let's take a look at it here.
Okay, gang, there are some videos every Warhammer YouTuber is required by internet law to make, and now it's my turn. Except unlike every other version of this video out there, and there are loads, this one is just going to take 20 minutes. And since there are about 20 factions in 40k, that gives me just under a minute to do each, which is plenty of time, right? As long as I don't spend too long on this intro.
We're doing the speedrun version here, boys.
Okay, the universe of Warhammer 40k has a lot of factions. That's actually one of the main draws of the game, but you can divide them up.
I mean, it's got a lot of factions, but they all can be pretty easily categorized. It's basically like, you know, the Imperium has what? Got the Custodes, the various Space Marine chapters, the Imperial Guard, the Mechanicus, and I think there might be even various versions of them. But all of that essentially is like the Imperium. And then there's what? There's Chaos, and then that's divided into what the various Chaos Gods, the 4 Chaos God factions. I don't know if in the fantasy version they have like a Demon Prince that kind of like encompasses all factions like they do in the fantasy version. And then there's the Chaos Space Marines. That's kind of Chaos. And then I guess basically everything else would just be considered like alien races, Xenos, the Eldar, Dark Eldar, Tau, Necron, the Necron Gene Stealer cults. I don't think there's another faction of the not the Necron. The Necron, but I was thinking of Tyranid. I was saying Necron, I'm thinking of Tyranid. That's how my brain works sometimes. So yeah, there's the Necron, and I don't think the Necron have any sub-factions, at least that I'm aware of. There's also the Harlequins, but I don't think they're like a big like tabletop faction. And then yeah, like I was saying, there's the Tyranids and the Tyranid Gene Stealers, and I don't think there's any other sub factions for them. So those are like, basically it's just kind of like 3 categories, and then those are like split into the various races and any subcategories of those races, from what I understand right now. Hello.
It has a lot of factions. That's actually one of the main draws of the game, but you can divide them up pretty.
There seems to be a lot more Warhammer fantasy factions too, now that I'm thinking about it, than the 40k verse. Like, I mean, there's in the fantasy, there's obviously humans, there's dwarves, there's vampires, and the vampires are split up into several different things from what I understand. Lizard men, there's the Beastmen, there's the Forces of Chaos, and again, there's all 4 Chaos Gods, plus I think like the Demon Prince, and then there's also just a general like Chaos Warriors faction. I think there's Norsica, which is also basically Chaos. There's the Elves, and there's like High Elves, there's Wood Elves, there's Dark Elves. There's Ogres, there's the Cathay faction. I think some of these are only available in Total War Warhammer. Anyway, the point is, there's actually the Skaven. There's a ton of fantasy ones, you know, if they're even talking about factions. There's so many fantasy factions. I'm curious if any of those, obviously orcs too, I'm curious if any more of those might in the future be kind of brought into the Warhammer 40k verse. I mean, Eldar are elves. There's Dark Eldar. Orcs are orcs. Necrons are kind of like the Tomb Kings. Chaos is chaos. Humans are humans. It's just sci-fi versions of them. There's not. I don't know if there's really a Tyranid to Warhammer Fantasy like comparison. Maybe Skaven. I don't think that's a very good comparison though, because Skaven are actually kind of somewhat intelligent, and well, not somewhat intelligent. They're pretty intelligent. They actually have some kind of weird technology that they use with, like, I guess chaos stuff. I don't know what their technology is based on, but they got, you know, the Rack Ogres and various machines and all kinds of crazy stuff that they create. But yeah, I don't know that there's really a Tyranid kind of to fantasy comparison. And then also, like, I don't know if there's really a comparison from them, from some of the fantasy reactions to the Warhammer, like Skaven, for example, Lizardmen, the vampire stuff. There might be, I guess, maybe some of the sub chapters of certain things could be comparable, like maybe the Terror Space Marine chapter. I don't know a ton about them. Maybe they have some more kind of like similarities to what the vampire factions would be in Warhammer Fantasy. I don't know, but I'm just curious, you know, another kind of what if idea thought, you know, would they want to add any kind of more of those factions from the fantasy verse into the 40k verse, and how would they do that? You know, I mean, because like futuristic space sci-fi vampires could easily be a thing. I could see the Skaven honestly being a thing as well. I mean, any of the races, honestly, you know, lizardmen, dwarves, you know, it's just, they just make sci-fi versions of them. So anyway, just with him talking about factions, it made me wonder, you know, if that would be, I would think though, if they were going to do anything like that, that would have happened already, right? Because what? The Warhammer 40k universe started in like the late 80s somewhere. I think late 80s, early 90s, right? It was when like 1.0, the tabletop version came out. Somewhere in there from what I understand. So, I mean, it's been, you know, 30-ish years, I think, right? So, I would think if they're, then again, I mean, they're still developing all this stuff, but I would think if they were going to add any of those kind of races or convert them over, they would have done it already. And maybe they have, and they've been eliminated, like, in the lore or something like that, and that's just not something I've gotten into yet. So, I mean, I guess let me know if that's something that has happened, if you guys know, if any of the fantasy factions actually have been in the 40k verse, but maybe been wiped out somehow. But anyway, let's go on with the video. Enough of my tangent here.
Pretty neatly into three categories. The Imperium, which is the main protagonist and human point of view faction.
Right.
Chaos, who are kind of the main antagonist, and the horror faction, centered around the hellish alternate dimension that is the war.
Right, and that's true. Also thinking about that now too, there's basically like, I mean, there's really not any good or bad guys in the 40k universe, but there's basically like the human perspective, and then the chaos perspective is like the antithesis. They're the opposites of each other. And then the alien races are kind of like third party, you know, factions that are like side kind of factions, I guess, stories. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily want to say them like they're side factions, because they obviously have an important place in the 40k lore and universe, but there's not as much like story, I guess, based around them. Like any of the books or the story is everything from the human perspective, as far as I know. I don't know if there's really any kind of lore story books from the Eldar perspective, other than maybe some of the stuff that happened with, you know, when Slaanesh was born. I don't know if there's any books that take place from the Eldar's perspective on that. That would be pretty interesting if that were the case. If there's any books from the Eldar's perspective of stuff leading up to Slaanesh's birth and then after that. So let me know about that too.
And finally, Xenos faction, centered around.
Well, sometimes when I hit back, it lowers the volume and it doesn't actually rewind. I don't get it. Anyway.
The hellish alternate dimension that is the Warp, And finally, Xenos, the alien species who also inhabit the galaxy and usually have a difficult relationship with the previous two. The biggest presence in the galaxy, at least officially, is the Imperium, so let's start there. The Imperium is a colossal, unwieldy, bureaucratic, authoritarian empire that insists on total control over all of humanity in the name of the Emperor.
You know, one of the things about the 40K universe that I've talked about in a lot of these videos is a lot of the ironies that happen in the 40K universe. And I always find it, you know, interesting and ironic that, you know, with how united humanity is, it's still like so oppressed. What we would consider like freedom in today's day and age does not exist in the Warhammer 40K universe. And yet, you know, humanity is united under one idea and one banner of, you know, the Emperor, you know, and the religion behind that has been created behind that. But they've given up all their essentially freedoms and even really their like self-identity. You know what I mean? Like, pretty much you're considered just a piece in the giant cog that is the Imperium, and you're born and raised to do your duty, and that's it. And your duty could be something as, you know, just being a meat shield out there fighting what God knows what battle on God knows what planet, or working in some kind of toxic factory for, you know, your entire life without ever seeing the sun or the light of day or anything like that, or God forbid you get turned into a servitor, or you get captured by, you know, an alien race and tortured and mutilated and killed, and you know what I mean? So it's like, I just find it's just such an irony again that humanity is really united under one great purpose, which is, I think, why, you know, it's not just because humanity is, you know, the stories are told from the human perspective and factions, because that's just obviously how we relate and identify. But yeah, I don't know. I'm running off on another tangent. But anyway, I just find it ironic that what we would consider our freedoms, giving up our freedoms and stuff that we would fight for in a lot of the belief systems that we have in today's day and age, are like not even thought of in the 40K universe. Yet humanity is so united under one idea that that's what really keeps, you know, humanity going, essentially, humanity alive. And yeah, anyway.
Insists on total control over all of humanity in the name of the Emperor, the psychic demigod who founded it 10,000 years before, but who now, because of a civil war shortly after that founding, exists as a barely aware corpse strapped to a life support machine and worshipped by humanity as a...
So then he's about to say just a god, you know, that's the greatest irony of 40K is you have a man who wanted to really have everything based on science and, you know, just the secular idea of science, and abolishing all kind of religion, who's now worshipped as a god. And I still think it would be an even greater irony should, because of everyone's firm faith and belief in the Emperor and that he is a god, that his spirit could coalesce in the warp as a god, you know, and he could be even more powerful than he was before. I just think that'd be hilarious. I just think it would be hilarious if that's the route they would ever go toward.
A god. This is a barely aware corpse strapped to a life support machine and worshipped by humanity as a god. It's not a nice place to live. Everyone's very, very clear about that. And it's so huge and unwieldy that infighting between its various internal factions for political control or territory is pretty commonplace. But the poster faction of the Imperium are the Space Marines, and they're meant to be above all that. Genetically engineered and psycho-conditioned transhuman super soldiers, the Space Marines are the elite special forces of the Imperium, each taken from their homeworlds as children, clad in powered armor and wielding the iconic bolt gun. Once, long ago, they were organized into great legions led by the Emperor's sons, demigods known as Primarchs, but the result was that civil war we mentioned, so by the time of 40K, they exist as 1,000 or autonomous, self-sufficient armies known as chapters.
Sort of.
Each of which functions a bit like a knightly order or monastic brotherhood, tasked with the defense of a particular area and recruiting from those planets, which means
Space
that
Templars,
each chapter
I
of
guess,
Space Marines is influenced by the culture of its homeworld, from the Roman-influenced Ultramarines to the Viking-influenced Space Wolves. Space Marines are an organization set somewhat apart from the rest of the Imperium. They protect their territories in the name of the Emperor and their Primarch in whatever way they see fit, and are treated by the rest of the Imperial armies as a kind of holy special forces petitioned for aid in a particular war zone or to conduct a particular mission. It's so rare to see one in real life that to many of the Imperium's regular citizens or mortal soldiers, they're seen almost as angels. There are loads of different chapters of Space Marines. In fact, you can make your own, and there are way too many to go through here, but two organizations.
Another irony is that, you know, Space Marines are considered almost mythological beings, mythological heroes, or even angels as he's described, but most Space Marines see humans as something lesser than. And even though the Emperor had created Space Marines to, you know, help go out and make the universe a safe place for humanity, you know, it's another one of those ironies where they've been genetically altered to be the perfect evolution of, well, close to, I guess, the perfect evolution of the fighting soldier and the Emperor's idea of what mankind could be, and then what humanity actually is, what the average person actually is kind of looked down upon by the majority of Space Marines.
Of Space Marines. In fact, you can make your own, and there are way too many to go through here, but two organizations that stand apart from the chapter system are the Grey Knights and the Death Watch. The Grey Knights are a chapter of psychic Space Marines clad in even more elite armor and dedicated to fighting the forces of chaos and the warp, which we'll get to in a minute. They're even more secretive and rare than the rest of the Space Marines, partly because when they're deployed, it's usually against the most horrific threats the Imperium ever encounters, issues that only the Grey Knights, with their mastery of psychic power, Aegis-warded armor, and Nemesis force weapons can handle. Their counterparts are the Death Watch, an organization of Space Marines from different chapters who band together to pool their experience in fighting different Xenos threats. The Death Watch use unique, advanced technologies in their kill teams, who operate covertly from watch fortresses stationed across the galaxy. But even though there are 1,000 chapters of Space Marines and those special organizations, Space Marines are actually really rare. The vast majority of the Imperium's armed forces are known as the Astra Militarum or Imperial Guard. Space is a big place, and planets are very far apart, so every Imperial world is required to raise its own defense forces and then tithe a portion of those into the Imperial Guard, deployed by the million across the Imperium's many, many war zones. Though the Guard regiments come from a huge variety of different cultures, they're still just humans, armed with the ubiquitous lasgun and backed up by columns of tanks and artillery driven forward by their commissars. The Astra Militarum also includes auxiliary units like the abhuman Ogrins or Ratlings, or the elite Tempestus Scion Special Forces, but the Imperial Guard's biggest weapon is numbers. The Imperium does not value human life particularly highly, and depictions of the glorious battles of the Imperial Guard are usually a horde of people being driven forward until the enemy run out of bullets. Those are the two main military arms of the Imperium, but the Imperium is a very complex organization, and each of its administrative arms maintains its own armed forces to protect its interests, often against some of the others. The state religion of the Imperium is controlled and enforced by the Adeptus Ministorum, and defending their shrine worlds and cathedrals are the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, orders of highly trained and lavishly equipped warrior nuns, clad in powered armor and armed with bolt guns and...
I forgot all about the Battle Sisters as part of, you know, the Imperium factions. Did I say the Inquisitors too? I think I said the Inquisitors. But if not, obviously, yeah, they're another, like, major faction of the Imperium. And then, I guess the Assassins could also be considered one. I didn't even say the Grey Knights. Dude, my brain right now.
And lavishly equipped warrior nuns. Clad in powered armor and armed with bolt guns and flamers, their faith in the Emperor manifests in the form of miracles and living saints. They're supported by the preachers and confessors of the church, as well as those poor unfortunates who committed a sin and have to atone for it through death in battle.
So one of the questions I would have too is, like, so there's some of the Battle Sisters are, you know, saints, I guess, and have an angelic, look about them. They have angelic wings and et cetera, et cetera. How does that come to be? Are they like mutations, or is it considered a miracle and, they're raised up to another level of human evolution or something? Like, I'm just curious how that works. Is it an evolutionary thing? Is it a genetic mutation kind of thing? Or is it like literally their faith is so strong that they like grow these wings and these powers? Or is it a psyker thing? Let me know about that. That's something I'm curious about.
Well as those poor unfortunates who committed a sin and have to atone for it through death in battle. Technology in the Imperium is seen through a haze of superstition and ritual guarded by the Adeptus Mechanicus, a galaxy-spanning network of tech priests who worship knowledge. Tech priests are present in every part of the Imperium, from maintaining starships to keeping the factories going. But while their forge worlds supply the main Imperial armies with very standardized military equipment, their own forces are way more diverse. Crazed blends of steampunk-inspired machinery, cybernetic soldiers, and what few robots the Imperium still maintains, including the gigantic battle walkers known as Titans.
Titans.
Smaller than those Titans, but still really big on the table, are the Imperial Knights. Descendants of some of the first human colonists who left Earth, Night Worlds are feudal planets led by a landed nobility mounted in medieval mechs known as knights that they use to hunt indigenous predators and protect their planets. Houses of Imperial Knights might be independent vassals of the Imperium or pledged to aid the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, the Emperor, when he was a bit more around, was a big fan of genetically engineered warriors, and his personal bodyguard, the Adeptus Custodes, were the pinnacle of his craft. Even more elite than the Space Marines or the Grey Knights, the Custodes in 40k are a brotherhood of warrior philosophers clad in ancient Auramite armor and wielding the symbolic Guardian Spear. They're pledged to protect the Emperor in the Imperial Palace on Terra, but they range across the galaxy, bolstering his armies or eliminating potential security threats before they grow to be a problem. And they're assisted in their mission by the Sisters of Silence, an all-female order of anti-psychic nulls who can counter and dissipate the forces of the warp. Together, these are known as the Talons of the Emperor. And finally, the Imperial Navy command the fleets and battleships that get all these armies to their war zones. Imperial ships are kilometers long and millennia old, barely understood leviathans from a forgotten age, and their crews live their entire lives within them, rarely setting foot on land. Each ship has a crew of thousands, from brutally treated gun crews to officers from distinguished military bloodlines, but for obvious reasons, they're rarely seen on the tabletop. The Imperium also has many smaller factions that might be included in your wider army.
He brings up a point that I hadn't really thought about too. Are there like actual like space naval battles that are played out on the tabletop, and how does that work compared to the normal, infantry squad, whatever based combat? Because yeah, from everything that I've seen so far about the actual tabletop game, which I'm very interested in getting into at some point, I've never seen actual like ship to ship naval combat, even though of course it's talked about a lot in the lore of and the novels and whatnot and the battles.
Imperium also has many smaller factions that might be included in your wider army, like the Inquisition, special agents rooting out heresy and secret threats from within, accompanied by idiosyncratic bands of skilled followers, or the Assassins of the Officio Assassinorum, ancient temples each dedicated to a different art of death. The Adeptus Arbiters keep the Imperium's laws and ensure that its planets are performing their duty to the Emperor, and the forces of the rogue traders are licensed explorers and privateers, commissioned to push forwards the boundaries of Imperial space. Anyway, we haven't got time for all of those. That's the main Imperial factions. Let's move on to the main antagonist of 40k, the forces of Chaos. The 40k universe exists alongside a parallel dimension known as the Warp, a dimension of emotional and psychic energy where time and space mean little. And there are things living in the Warp. All that emotional energy over time has coalesced into great powers, horrific godlike intelligences that want to break into real space and corrupt the sentient species that live there. Which would be fine if the Imperium didn't also rely on the Warp for interstellar travel and communications, so over time various factions have been corrupted by it. The most prominent of these are the Chaos Space Marines. Remember that great civil war we were talking about earlier? Well, these are the guys who rebelled. They might have lost their great rebellion, the Horus Heresy, 10,000 years ago, but they've been hiding out in the warp ever since, where time doesn't really mean much, growing more and more bitter and powerful over 10,000 years as more and more renegade Space Marines flock to their cause.
Another question that I have just thinking about this as we're, going through this, have there been any Chaos Space Marines of any note, or just in general, I guess, who have been redeemed, who have been able to shed the Chaos corruption and come back and have, I don't know, served their time or have done something in battle to redeem themselves? I would assume even if they do redeem themselves, they would still be considered, Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. A little yawn just came out of nowhere. Anyway, I would assume even if they do something to redeem themselves, regardless, they would be considered heretics and corrupt, and they would just be, murdered pretty much on the spot, no matter what. But I'm curious if there are any stories of something like that. The only thing I kind of somewhat know about is, I guess, Horus himself, at the end of the fight, the Emperor was able to purge the demons out of him, and he was, obviously very regretful of his actions before the Emperor destroyed his soul. But yeah, I'm curious. I haven't heard anything of that, because I mean, you hear in Star Wars lore and stuff like that of, Jedi and Sith going back and forth between light and dark, and some people walking, the line, the balance between such. But I haven't really heard anything about that in the 40K universe, so I was just curious if anything like that of note has happened, if there have been, any characters of note or anything like that that have managed to redeem themselves in some way from the corruption of chaos.
Over 10,000 years as more and more renegade Space Marines flock to their cause. Chaos Space Marine raiding parties are a constant threat in many parts of the galaxy, but those threats pale in comparison to the Great Black Crusades, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, where thousands of ancient heretic Astartes descend on the Imperium, armed not only with ancient patterns of Space Marine arms and armor, but also twisted demon engines that fuse forbidden science with the raw stuff of the warp itself. Like the Space Marines of the Imperium, the Chaos Space Marines can be broken down into various legions and warbands, each of which is slightly different, but there are a couple of ones that are quite unique. The Thousand Suns serve the chaos-powered Tzeentch, god of magic, and before the heresy, their mastery of the psychic arts was unmatched. But since their fall to chaos, the majority of the legion have become nothing more than animated suits of armor enthralled to ridiculously powerful sorcerers and accompanied by twisted magical beasts. The flip side to this is the Death Guard, dedicated to Nurgle, the god of disease. Their plague marines
also
are
a chaos faction I'd be interested in playing as
of the noble warriors they once were, trudging relentlessly forward and spreading viruses and plague wherever they go. And finally, the World Eaters worship Khorne, the manifestation of rage and anger. Their warriors are barely controllable berserkers created by brutal psychosurgery, existing only to spill blood in the name of their lord. And wherever any of the Chaos Space Marines go, a greater threat follows. Once the barriers between the worlds have been thinned, the denizens of the warp itself can break through. These Chaos demons are nightmares given form, hordes of twisted creatures dedicated to one of the four great Chaos powers, Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle, are made in their image. They sweep in through breaches in real space, damning entire worlds to an eternity of slaughter for the amusement of the thirsting gods. Chaos, of course, can corrupt anything, and some of their more powerful scions are the Chaos Knights, the descendants of Imperial Night Houses that threw their lot in with the traitors millennia ago. Their Night Walkers are twisted horrors, suffused with the power of the warp. Their pilots fused into their command thrones or possessed by demons. And like the Imperium, there are also many smaller factions in the background. Corrupted tech priests known as the Dark Mechanicum labor in their hell forges to supply the Chaos Marine armies with demon engines, and human cultists or traitor Imperial guardsmen make up the hordes of the lost and the damned. But it's not just the armies of the Imperium that are in danger from the warp. Chaos is something of an existential threat to everyone in the 40k universe, and humanity isn't the only target for them. There are other alien species in the galaxy that are right to fear the warp. The Eldari were once the most powerful empire in the galaxy before the rise of the Imperium, a long-lived and extremely psychic species, but their power and hubris saw their homeworlds consumed by chaos, and in the universe of 40k, they're a dwindling, dying race, living in fear of their souls being eaten by the warp, and the ways they try and avoid that fate define which sort of Eldari they are. The Craftworld Eldar live on vast Wraithbone spaceships known as Craftworlds, colossal cities swimming through the depths of space. They lead ordered, contemplative lives, and to stave off the warp, they dedicate themselves to different structured paths. Their forces are made up of the various warrior aspects of their ancient dead gods, and Wraithbone constructs powered by Eldar souls trapped within spirit stones, all led by their Farseers, who manipulate the strands of fate to ensure the Eldar survival.
I was gonna say, I thought they had created some kind of technology recently within the lore of the universe where they were able to snatch their souls back or whatever when they died, and they were put in these devices or whatever, and then they were able to, you know, be reborn again. I'm curious. I wonder if they are able to keep the memories of their past lives if that happens, because that would be a huge boon if that happens. Because I mean, you think about it, you know, having to retrain new generations of soldiers and retrain them their skills, but if you're able to be reborn and you retain your knowledge from previous lives, then all your training and your skill sets and all that kind of stuff would, you know, I would assume, you know, transfer with you. So
by their Farseers, who manipulate the strands of fate to ensure the Eldar's survival. On the flip side, the Drukhari are cruel and sadistic Eldari pirates who live in the webway, halfway between real space and the warp. With no access to spirit stones, they replenish their ever-fading souls by torturing prisoners taken in raids, and their societies are
doing what condemned them in the first place, even more so, doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. Like, out of all of the terrible things that could happen in the 40k universe, being captured and becoming a prisoner of a Drukhari sounds like it is the worst of the worst fates. It's one of those situations where if you're on the front lines against them and you had like 1 or 2 bullets left, you would use that on yourself and the person next to you to save yourself from that kind of fate, because good lord.
Ever-fading souls by torturing prisoners taken in raids, and their societies are split between the Cabals that rule their dark city of Camorra, the gladiatorial witch cults, and the homunculus covens, who guarantee unnaturally long lives to the rest of the Drukhari by performing hideous experiments on enslaved species.
The Dark Eldar is something I need to learn a little bit more about. I didn't even know there were all these kind of little like subcategories of them, the witch cults and these homunculus guys and yada yada. I'd be curious to learn more about, I guess, the different, I don't know if it's sub races or sub factions, whatever the terminology for, or the different classes, I guess, of Drukhari. But yeah, I'd be interested to learn more about that. And I guess if there is any knowledge, how their governmental process works, and is it a system of like how many slaves you own or something like that, you know what I mean? Like, how, I'm just curious how that works.
To the rest of the Drukhari by performing hideous experiments on enslaved species. In between these two main factions are the Harlequins, deadly dancers and performers who travel between both Eldar societies to keep the old Eldar myths alive, and whose souls are pledged to their laughing god, Kegarak. And the Yinari, a cult of the Eldar god of death. And like everything else in 40k, there are other factions that...
I was gonna say, I've never even heard of those type of Eldari before. And the only other one that I knew of that I heard of was like there's a faction of Eldar that are kind of more primitive, more, I don't know if it's primitive or tribal, but they prefer like the old ways, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. I guess they're more like druidic, kind of more one with nature and like animals and stuff, I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that, let me know. But I know there's one other kind of Eldar faction that I know of that is more, I guess, nature-based, would be considered kind of like a Wood Elves equivalent or something like that, maybe? I don't know.
A cult of the Eldar god of death. And like everything else in 40k, there are other factions that aren't often seen on the tabletop, like the pirate Corsairs or the Exodites, who retreated from the fall of the Eldar to the most verdant and far-flung planets in the ancient empire. All the Eldari were originally created by the long-dead and near-mythical race known as the Old Ones. But the Old Ones must have been big fantasy fans, because if you haven't figured it out now, they're fantasy elves in space.
Yeah.
And if we've got elves in space, though not officially part of the Imperium, the kin of the Leagues of Votann are descended from the earliest human colonists who settled near the galactic center and have preserved much of the lost technical knowledge of humanity in the form of huge data cores known as Votann. By the time of 40k, the kin of the Leagues...
Are these space dwarves? Do they actually have dwarves in it, and I just haven't heard about them up until now?
Huge data cores known as Votann. By the time of 40k, the kin of the Leagues are genetically engineered clones created by the Votann and genetically tailored to whatever job is needed, and their armies range across the galaxy, identifying planets that might be ripe for exploitation.
That dude right there at the very bottom in the front right there, like the front right guy at the very bottom, looks just like a StarCraft 2 Space Marine, brother. Like, that is like... It very much is reminding me of the StarCraft 2 cinematic, you know, where we see, I forget the character's name, but him getting released from prison and his Space Marine armors being, you know, welded onto him.
And their armies range across the galaxy, identifying planets that might be ripe for exploitation and profit. They're stocky and serious and durable, and yep, they're fantasy dwarves in space. Continuing the fantasy theme, 40k also has orcs. Like the Eldari, the orcs were created long ago by the Old Ones for one thing only: war. But after millions of years, they've forgotten their origins and are now a dangerously random problem for everyone else in the galaxy, rampaging around in colossal migrations known as wars. Orcs are kind of the comic relief in 40k. Their society is based entirely around fighting, and they go to war in ramshackle vehicles accompanied by a range of squiggly beasts to ride, fight, eat, wear, or attack with. They also speak like 1980s football hooligans for some reason. It's a common orc thing. Pretty much.
I hope that a lot of these different factions get put into Darktide at some point in time, like fighting orcs, fighting Eldar, you know, stuff like that. Some of that stuff would be pretty cool, man. I hope that they keep expanding and adding more stuff to, you know, the game. And I hope eventually we actually see, like, maybe Chaos Space Marines and other things like that in Darktide, and hopefully even some more classes and races that we could play as. I would love to see, I don't know, just more. I don't know. I just want more in the game. I just want more stuff to do and more stuff to play as and stuff like that. I would really love a Space Marine version of Darktide, which I think, like, what is it, Death Hulk or something like that? They kind of made a Space Marine game similar-ish, kind of, but not really. But yeah, the when they first announced Darktide out, I'd always kind of wondered, like, why not just be Space Marines and then just take everything up to like 11, like add even more hordes and more crazy creatures and more things to fight, you know what I mean? So, I don't know. Anyway.
They also speak like 1980s football hooligans for some reason. It's a common orc thing. Pretty much the opposite of that is the Tau Empire, a small, self-contained civilization in the galactic east, and the sort of Xenos threat that the Imperium would probably have wiped out earlier if they weren't beset on all sides by more pressing matters. The Tau are an optimistic and hopeful faction, divided into 5 elemental castes who work to advance their philosophy of the greater good. Detesting close combat, they fight...
That's interesting. They're have like an elemental cast, so it's like earth, wind, water, fire kind of a thing. Makes me want to learn a little bit more about them.
who work to advance their philosophy of the greater good. Detesting close combat, they fight from within high-tech battlesuits or advanced vehicles and are supported by a range of alien species they've absorbed into their growing empire, like the mercenary Kroot, peerless hunters and trackers, or the Vespid. Now, if the Tau are the youngest playable faction in the 40k universe, then the award for the oldest goes to the Necrons.
Yep.
Once, millions of years ago, the Necron tier fought a great war against the Old Ones. In fact, that's one of the reasons the Old Ones kept creating all those other species, to fight for them. After half the galaxy was destroyed, the Necron tier went to sleep, their ancient dynasties surviving in skeletal metal bodies in great tomb worlds. And as the 41st millennium draws to a close, they're starting to wake up. The Necrons are kind of like space undead, blending legions of durable automatons, led by cunning overlords and cryptechs whose science is so advanced it appears like magic to everyone else. And finally, on our whistle-stop tour of 40k, we come to the ultimate end, the great devourer itself, the Tyranids. Attracted by the light of our galaxy, the Tyranids are an extragalactic bug swarm that exists only to devour, descending on planets and stripping them clean of biomass, leaving only lifeless and barren rocks in their wake as the swarm moves on. They are totally unknowable and alien, their technology entirely biological and governed as much by animalistic instinct as by their group intelligence, the hive mind. But they are capable of planning, as evidenced by their offshoot faction, the Gene Stealer cults. Gene Stealers are a Tyranid bioform designed to infiltrate unwary worlds, spreading through the population like a parasite and controlling their followers by a low-level psychic field. Gene Stealer cults destabilize the host planet from within, which then rise up in bloody revolution just as the hive fleet of the Tyranids draws near, hastening the planet's demise. Okay, that's 20 factions. Did I do more than that? There's loads more to go into here. This is only the briefest introduction to each faction, but it should give you an idea of the variety out there and sort of vaguely how they're all related to each other. The 40k universe is a very, very big place, continually expanded for 35 years now with new models, new stories, and new information. There are still whole species and civilizations who've never made it to the tabletop, whole arms of the Imperium that haven't really been investigated, so this list is likely to grow in the future. How do they play? What models are available? Well, those are all subjects for other videos, but if you're new to 40k, then hopefully that gives you some ideas on where to start. Thanks for watching.
There we go. Good video.
And if you'd like even more videos about the background and lore of 40k, there should be a little box just popping up there on the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, well, there's a link to the Patreon in the thingy below.
In the thingy below. There you go. Another great video here by Arbitor Ian. Just letting the credits roll. Oops. All right. There it is. We've got another, you know,
the Horus Heresy is probably
got a few. Every Warhammer. Anyway, sorry about that.
So
got discombobulated with everything going here. Videos are playing for some reason when they're not supposed to be. So I apologize. But anyway, like I was saying, that's another video here by Arbiter Ian. Every Warhammer 40k faction in 20 minutes. I actually learned a decent bit about some other things. You know, there's more stuff going on with the Drukhari. There's more stuff, you know, more sub-factions maybe, potentially, or facets of the race that I would like to learn more about. Like I said at the beginning of the video, you know, talking about how there's a lot more races in the fantasy version versus the Warhammer 40k version. I had no idea that there were actually space dwarves, that they were a thing. And I guess apparently there's a lot more races out there that just haven't really made it to the tabletop that are just part of the lore I don't even know about. So I would, you know, if there's any information about some more of those races and their involvement in various things in the universe, you know, let me know. I'd like to learn more about that kind of stuff. But yeah, great video. Like I said, learned some more about some of the factions that I didn't know. And yeah, go check them out. Like I said, there will be a link down below in the description for this video without any commentary, without my commentary anyway. And a link to Arbiter Ian's channel. He's a great content creator, makes a lot of stuff. Like he said at the end there, he's got a Patreon, so if you want to check out his stuff and go that extra mile and support him, you know, monetarily, go check out his Patreon and everything that he does. But for me, for now, this is gonna be it. I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you guys very much. If you're watching the video still to the very end, it means a lot. I greatly appreciate all the love and support lately. Channel growth has been crazy. And if you like this video, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps keep the channel growing, helps keep things going. So appreciate it. Hope you're having a wonderful day and a wonderful holiday season so far. I will talk to you guys later. Have a good one, everybody.